I'm Brett.
And I'm Alice.
And we are the prosecutors. Today on the prosecutors, when a world-class athlete went for a long run, no one could have expected that she would never come home. Today, we investigate the mystery of the disappearance of Amy Wroe Bechtel. Hello, everybody, and welcome to this episode of The Prosecutors. I'm Brett, and I'm joined, as always, with my enigmatic co-host, Alice.
That was awesome. Thanks for that introduction. So you like...
You like enigmatic?
That was just, that's a beautiful word, but you also paused for a really, really long time before we started recording to think of that word, and I appreciate it.
Well, you know, Alice, you're worth the extra time and effort, so I just wanted to make sure that you know, appropriately honor your enigmatic nature.
Thanks. I feel like we can do like a word cloud of descriptors that you use. I think this kind of like...
Is this going to get harder?
Well, it's kind of like toilet paper word of the day. You know, like you're going to run out at some point.
Exactly. But not today. Today, we're still going strong. So
I think
I want to welcome everybody. Go ahead, Alice. I didn't mean to interrupt you.
Nope, not at all. I was going off on a tangent about how I just described myself as toilet paper.
You did. I wasn't going to point that out, but you know, I think the audience probably noticed. So welcome everybody to this episode. We've got a lot to talk about today. We have an old mystery, and one that I think Alice would agree with me, needs some attention. It's a case that when it first happened, it got a ton of attention. And I think everybody in America probably knew the name Amy Wroe Bechtel. But as time passed and the trail went cold, people forgot about her. Maybe not where she was from, but certainly her name sort of faded from the consciousness of folks around the country. And this is not one of those cases that you see covered on a lot of places in true crime. So it was something we wanted to talk about because, as we've always said, somebody knows something out there, and we are big believers that you guys hold the keys to a lot of these mysteries, and this is one of them. So we wanted to cover this case and give you guys an opportunity to solve it after all these years. And because the case is so old, we're going to take you all the way back to 1997, the heady days of 1997. Alice wasn't born yet, and I was in high school.
Not true.
I guess Alice was probably born, but anyway, it was the era of grunge and
Backstreet Boys. Is it Backstreet Boys?
The Backstreet Boys.
Yeah,
around by 1997.
Sure.
You know, I don't really remember 1997 as a year for music, but I'm sure it was a good one. I was going to say Nirvana, but Nirvana was already gone by then. I guess we had moved on to the Foo Fighters. So
you have better taste than I did.
So anyway, taking you guys back to 1997, all the way to July of that year in a place called Lander, Wyoming. And I am told that Lander, Wyoming is one of the most beautiful places in the country. So we're not getting paid by the Lander Tourist Board, but if you're a fan of anything having to do with the outdoors, Lander is the place to be. And Amy Bechtel and her husband loved the outdoors. It was the thing that defined them, and it was the thing that had brought them together.
Can I do a quick aside on Wyoming? You can cut it out if you want.
Of course.
Wyoming, have you ever been to Wyoming?
I have not.
It really is absolutely gorgeous. So the only time I've been to Wyoming was actually for a court hearing, and I showed up like on a little prop plane, and it was a they told me this flight got canceled every, third day, and it only ran once a day because the wind is, so windy in the mountains and whatnot. And I show up and I stay at like I don't know, a Holiday Inn or something, whatever hotel was there, get in late, wake up the next morning ready to go to court, and I'm wearing a suit, as one does when one goes to court. And I'm going down the elevator, and there's this other person in the elevator with me, and she keeps looking at me, like taking furtive glances and then looking away, like, trying not to get caught looking at me. But it's very obvious she's looking at me. And finally, she like works up the courage and she says, "Excuse me, ma'am, what profession is one in order to have to wear a suit in Wyoming?" I didn't know how to respond, but she's right. Everyone is in the outdoors all the time, and there is like completely impractical for me to be in a suit.
That's awesome. I love that.
That's my Wyoming story.
And that's the kind of place you want to live, right?
Yeah,
that's
absolutely.
the kind of place I'd like to live.
Absolutely.
And that was Amy Bechtel. You weren't going to catch her in a suit. And July 24th, 1997, it didn't start out all that different for any other day for 24-year-old Amy Wroe Bechtel. She had some errands to run in town. After heading over to the Wind River Fitness Center, where she taught classes, she actually taught a Ute.
You okay there?
A youth weightlifting class. She kissed her husband goodbye and headed out for an ordinary day in her life. And after finishing teaching that class, she swung by Camera Connection Photos at around 2:30 before stopping at another store, Gallery 331, to speak to her friend and the owner, Greg Wagner. Amy was actually going to enter one of her photos into a contest, and she wanted to get it framed. These were the kind of things that she was doing that day. And although Amy was her normal, bubbly self, Wagner noticed that she also seemed to be in a bit of a hurry, glancing at her watch several times during the conversation. And Amy wasn't being rude. She just had her mind on the run that she was going to be taking later that day. For Amy, a day wouldn't be complete without a long, lonely jog. Amy told Greg goodbye, and as far as we know, he was the last person to see Amy alive.
So based on what we'd learn later, it seems clear that after leaving the shop, Amy drove to the Shoshone National Forest to map out a course for the 10K run she was organizing with her gym. And by map out, I mean run it. So she was running it ahead of time so that she could then explain it, guide her team afterwards. Amy had gone from a casual runner to a hardcore athlete. She started running in high school, and then she walked on at the University of Wyoming, which is pretty amazing, actually, to be able to walk on. So like most walk-ons, things had been rough at first, and she often lagged a quarter of a mile or more behind the rest of the pack. But she was a good teammate, and her spirit was infectious. People loved her on the team. When it seemed like she couldn't afford to run anymore and pay tuition, her coach actually gave her a scholarship with the understanding that the next year she'd need to move on. But that wasn't Amy. She worked relentlessly. And the girl who could barely keep up when she started was leading the team by the time she finished. Her senior year, she set a school record in the 3,000 meters, and by 1997, she was training to try out for the 2000 Olympic Games. She ran every day. And as her husband said, Amy didn't tell him that she'd be running that afternoon. Because, and he said, it would have been like telling me that she was going to brush her teeth that day. It was just a regular part of her routine.
And I think this says so much about Amy, for anybody who's ever gone out for a run. I mean, number one, long distance running takes a special kind of person. Just the ability to push yourself and, there's, when you're on the 6th mile of a 10-mile run, there's nobody out there with you to say, hey, you got to keep going. You've got to convince yourself. You got to motivate yourself. And it would have been impressive enough, like you were saying, Alice, if she had just walked on and competed in college, been a college athlete. That's a pretty big deal. But to basically go from an ordinary runner to an Olympic hopeful, I think it's amazing, and it really says something about her and about her drive.
Absolutely. A lot of people say that running, especially long distances, is a mental game. You really need a lot of mental fortitude for the reasons that you just explained. And so I think this says a lot about kind of the grit that she has and her ability to really just a strong mind to work so hard to be a leader.
I mean, when I go for a run, I'm like a half mile into it, and I'm thinking, why am I doing this? So,
I'm
so I
thi-
really respect people who can do that.
if it takes mental fortitude to run long distances, then that's certainly something I lack.
Well, you ran a marathon, didn't you?
Yeah.
Am I making that up?
No, no, I
Yeah, of
did,
course you
but
did.
I ran past tense, no longer. I can't do it anymore. That mental fortitude went a long time ago.
So Alice mentioned Amy's husband, and that husband was Steve Bechtel. And it's probably not that surprising that Amy met Steve at the University of Wyoming because they were both athletes. I don't know. Somebody as dedicated and athletic as Amy, I don't know that she could have been married to somebody who wasn't as into athletic endeavors as she was. They'd been married for over a year, a little bit over a year, and they had just bought a house together. By all accounts, they were happy newlyweds. They both had their degrees in exercise physiology, and they dreamed of opening a gym in Lander, Wyoming, a place that they loved, making money, doing the things that made them happy. Just, I mean, the dream that we all have, right? They were living it. They moved to the place they wanted to be with a bunch of people who were into the same things they were into. Like Alice said, this was an outdoor community. This was a community of runners and rock climbers, and that's what they were into. They'd recently paid off their student loans, and Steve was becoming something of a burgeoning star in the world of rock climbing. And on that day in July, while Amy was planning her big run, Steve met up with a buddy to do some climbing 70 miles from Lander near Du Bois, Wyoming.
And after running her errands, Amy stopped by her house and grabbed a yellow tank top, black shorts, and a pair of Adidas trail shoes. From there, she drove to the Loop Road before parking her car at the Burnt Gulch Cutoff. What we know now is she leaves the car unlocked and starts running. And by the way, Wyoming is very remote, so it's not strange for her to leave her car unlocked. She drives especially to kind of this trail. It's unlikely that she will run into anyone as she's running. That's how kind of remote it is.
Yeah, I mean, she's in the Shoshone National Forest, and this is a town, Lander, of a few thousand people. So, yeah, it's not that unusual to do something like that.
And especially having, gone on long runs before, it's nice not to have to be weighed down by keys or, lots of things to carry with you. So sometimes it's just, I used to keep like my key by the wheel of my car, even though I lived in cities where you had to lock your car, but I would leave the car keys very close to the car because I just didn't want to carry them. So the less you have to worry about while you're running, the better. And here, there's nothing to worry about. You're in a national forest. It's beautiful. It's remote. So now Steve gets back from climbing and Amy's not home, but he really doesn't think anything of it because again, they have their independent lives that day and she usually goes for long runs. But by 10:30 that night, after he's called everyone he and Amy knows, he starts to get worried because Amy's still not home. He calls the sheriff's department and says something that will be scrutinized for the rest of time. He says, yeah, hey, I've got a missing person here, I think, and I wonder if you had a spare around any place?
Yeah, we can talk about that for a second.
Yeah, it's very, it's almost like I guess my mom's making me call this in.
Yeah, and he's really been criticized for this because it obviously seems like he's making light of the fact that his wife is missing. Honestly, I could see myself saying something stupid like that. When you're really worried and you almost are making light of it because you don't want to believe it's a serious thing.
And it's also like when your life becomes more dramatic than you ever imagined, right? You don't imagine that you'll have to say something like, I have to report a missing person. That seems like out of a movie. And it hasn't been that long, right? Even though it would be strange for her not to be home by that night, it's not like she's been missing for a day or, even into the into the nighttime, really, you know? And so
Right.
I can
And I
imagine where
think
it's like, am I being dramatic? Am I being overly worried? And then she's going to come home and say, oh my goodness, I was at the movies. I had my phone off. Remember I told you?
And I think he's probably his greatest fear at this point is probably she went for a run somewhere and she stumbled and broke her leg, right? And she can't get back. So, even though that's a serious situation, and obviously he's worried about his wife, I don't think he's thinking, Ted Bundy picked her up on the side of the road or anything.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it makes sense that it makes sense that he would be scrutinized because this is the first thing, that sets off kind of the missing person case. But like we've said so many times before, hindsight 2020, he didn't know that this was going to turn into this big missing person case, right? He just thought I should probably seek some help, but this is probably nothing because most things in your life end up not being as dramatic as you may think it will be.
And I mean, that's a theme we return to again and again and again in these cases is that people don't necessarily know that this moment is a defining moment of their life. They don't know that what they are saying right now will be scrutinized for all time and criticized and picked apart. So it is very easy to look back on things with hindsight and think, wow, that's really weird that he would say that when his wife is missing. But he doesn't actually know, at that moment at least, that his wife is missing. But one thing that is definitely the case is once he makes that phone call, things start falling into place. And what follows is one of the most exhaustive searches in Wyoming history. Like we just said, this is a place if you get lost, if you got to get lost, Lander is a place you want to get lost. Some of the very best hikers, rock climbers, outdoor enthusiasts in the world immediately descend on Lander and spread out through the Shoshone National Forest trying to find Amy. The search and rescue team for Lander is one of the best search and rescue teams in the country because they're made up of people just like this. And Chip Williams, who was the head of that search and rescue team, the Fremont County search and rescue team, would later say that he'd never seen anything like it in his more than 15 years on the job. So we talk about cases a lot where we wish there had been more immediate reaction to a disappearance. The thing that sets this case apart is there was immediate reaction, overwhelming reaction, a massive search covering that area and with some of the best searchers in the world.
And Brett, I think about that, like why that would be the case. And I think it's because Amy is one of them, right? They're all thinking, what if that were me? She knows this terrain. She knows the Shoshone National Forest. She goes for these long runs every single day. In fact, she was mapping out a run for others to go on. This could easily be me. This is not just some novice who got lost in the woods. And it kind of strikes close to home for them, which is why, I've been thinking about why the turnout was so immense. And I think part of it is she's one of them.
I think that's absolutely right. I mean, this was a tight-knit community. Like you said, this is not some bozo from the city who drove in on the weekend and decided to go hiking with a single, 20-ounce bottle of water and then disappeared. This is somebody who knows the ropes and has been around. And so they do. I mean, they pour everything into this search and they do everything they can to find Amy. But despite all that effort, there is a real frustrating lack of clues. They eventually find Amy's vehicle where she had parked it. Alice talked about that earlier, and we'll go through how they found that when we talk about the timeline. But one of the weird things is there are no footprints near the vehicle, even though Amy had some pretty distinctive shoes on that should have left some identifiable tracks. And in fact, searchers find no sign of Amy. None of the discarded items that lost individuals often leave behind for searchers and that you would expect someone like Amy to know to leave behind. And in fact, there's no sign really that Amy had ever even been there.
You say that people like Amy who are experienced know what to do if they're lost. And that's just another point of how she is one of these experienced people, right? There are things you can do to leave clues for people who are searching for you, because I don't know if Amy ever participated in a search, but surely if you take these outdoor wilderness runs, essentially, you know from hearing stories in the news or whatnot of what happens when someone gets lost. And surely she is attuned to that sort of thing and knows, you know, leave a shoelace on this branch in a place that it can't get there by themselves, so people know, Amy put this here for us to find her.
And there was a story a couple weeks ago about, I think, an 18-year-old girl out west who got lost. I think her car ran out of gas, had a flat tire or something, and she got lost in the woods trying to take a shortcut or whatnot. And that's exactly what she did. She left things behind as she was trying to make her way through. And something like 6, 7 days later, they found her alive in the woods. So, yeah, that's the kind of thing you would expect. If for some reason Amy went off trail, right? And for some reason she's out in the woods and lost, that she would start to do that sort of thing.
Right, so they don't find anything, but what do they find? So they do find Amy's to-do list from the day. We already went through some of the things that was on her errand list, and it's in her car along with her keys. Again, kind of like I noted before, I don't think it's unusual to go for a long run without your keys. They're heavy and bulky and jingle, and you might lose them on the trail. And if you do, in the wilderness, you may never find your car keys to drive back home. So I don't think that's that unusual. But looking at the list that's found in her car, Amy has marked out landmarks she would have passed on the way to where she parked her car, noting their mileage. So it's evident from this that Amy was driving her car that day and had begun marking off the route for the marathon before she parked her car.
And this is significant, right? Because despite the fact that there's no sign of Amy in the wilderness and they don't find her footprints, it doesn't seem like someone drove her car up there and dumped it. It seems like Amy was going through everything she had to do that day and was proceeding along her plan, right? So she was going to mark off that marathon. She was going to run her long run along the trail. But in addition to that, as she's driving up, she's also noting the mileage so she can get this trail for the marathon or the 10 mile or 10K really marked out. So it does seem, whatever happened to Amy, that she drove her car that day and parked it and left her keys.
Right, absolutely. Kind of seems like she's mid-list and just vanishes. It doesn't really make sense, what happened. We talked about this incredible search team that shows up, and they check all the roads and trails, and they recheck it by noon that day. And Fry Lake becomes base camp. And there are even helicopters that are brought in with infrared body sensors to help look for Amy. Volunteers are working 12-hour shifts. I mean, this is exhausting work in the sun, out in the wilderness where the terrain is very rocky, it's uneven. It's not a walk in the park, despite it being a park. They're rappelling into canyons and hiking down into the forest undergrowth just in case Amy has somehow fallen in there. And for 6 days, they search exhaustively. And for 6 days, they find absolutely not a single trace of Amy. I mean, that is just, we've talked about how crimes are messy and it's really hard to leave absolutely no evidence behind when there's a crime committed. It's also really hard to disappear from the face of this planet with absolutely no sign, not a footprint, not a snagged hair on some branch. And these people know what they're looking for because, people do get lost in these national forests, and usually it's just a hiker that's accidentally meandered off the path, but they know what to look for. And this is tough terrain. It's pretty hard to not leave behind something.
And I'll say this about Amy Bechtel. There is I don't really know what to call it. It's kind of like the smiley face killers. This thing called Missing 411. And it's this theory, and I forget the guy who came up with this theory, but it's all about missing people in national parks. And he's got some sort of really crazy stories, kind of like Amy's story, about people who go into national parks and they seem to just vanish off the face of the earth with no evidence whatsoever. And I've always had a lot of doubts about that theory and about whether or not the stories that he tells in in those books, in the books he writes about this, whether they're entirely accurate. But one thing I think I can say for sure is that in Amy Bechtel's case, she just vanished. I mean, it is one of those things where they couldn't have looked any harder for her. They scoured that place. I mean, they had people going into caves, looking in caves for her. I don't think there is a single place out there that they didn't look. Now, if you talk to the search and rescue guys, they will tell you, obviously, it's a really big forest. We scoured it. Does that mean somebody didn't walk right past her body? It's possible, right? It's possible. She could be out there to this day. But I think what we can say for certain is if she is out there, it's not because they didn't look for her.
Yeah, that's right. And, they even set up the Amy Wroe Bechtel Recovery Headquarters in Lander. And before long, they had even mailed out more than 200,000 posters around the nation. So they didn't keep their search right in Shoshone National Park. They decided to just spread it around the country in hopes that someone would see Amy's face and recognize her in case she had gone somewhere else somehow. And tips do come in, but none of them pan out. And no trace of Amy has ever been found.
And apparently, in 1997, when this happened, Amy's face was everywhere. I mean, they really did send out these posters all over the place. All the big, mystery-style shows covered this at some point. Unsolved Mysteries, America's Most Wanted, I think, covered it. The Family appeared on Geraldo, which was one of the biggest things going back then, mid-90s. Everybody knew her name, and everybody was looking for her, and people saw her all over the place. They saw her from Alaska, to Miami, but none of those tips ever panned out. There was not a single shred of evidence about Amy's whereabouts, despite all that attention. It's truly remarkable. I mean, this is not a case like Brian Schaefer, where it's a crazy case because somebody disappears from a place you wouldn't expect them to disappear from. But it is an insane case when you think about the amount of focus and attention that was on this case and the fact that not a single piece of evidence of where Amy went was ever found.
And Brett and I were kind of joking about this before we started recording, but take a look at that missing poster. There are 2 pictures of Amy on the missing poster, and they look like 2 completely different people. I don't know what that actually means at the end of the day, except it just reminds me of what Cheryl McCollum said in that wonderful interview we had with her, where she says you want a picture of what you look like now so that people can recognize you if you are somewhere out there. But what strikes me, I guess, is that those pictures are probably close in time to each other because one looks like a wedding photo and the other one is probably a recent photo, and she'd only been married for a little over a year. That she can look that different in 2 pictures, that I wonder if I would recognize her if I did see her somewhere.
And I want everybody, if you're not watching this on YouTube, go to our website and take a look at this photo, because this is really a living representation of what Cheryl was talking about. It was a huge mistake to use her wedding photo because she doesn't look anything like what she looks like when it looks like she's, I would say she's going out somewhere. She's probably out to dinner or something. She's kind of dressed up or whatnot. Really what they should have done, there should have been a picture of her running if they had it.
That's a good point.
It should have been a picture of her with her hair up and sweaty, and that's what it should have been, not the wedding photo. You guys got to look at this. It almost makes me feel like I got the wrong file.
Isn't it shocking? Because even her eyes look like different eyes.
Everything about her looks different.
If
the shape of her face.
Well, I mean, her hair is obviously very different in the 2 pictures. But imagine take out the hair. If you can just try to imagine away the hair, the faces look completely different. Like you said, her jawline looks different in the 2 pictures. I mean, it is just, I don't even know which one's her.
Yeah, it's crazy. It is really wild. So I want you guys to take a look at that because it's something else. And if somehow somebody else's picture got transposed onto this missing poster that I pulled off the internet, let us know. Because honestly, if you said that, if you sent me an email right now that said somehow you've got somebody else on there, I would believe it 100% because it does not look like her.
Right.
So let's go through the timeline. Let's do it. Alice, why don't you start?
Let's do it. All right. So, as we said, this all happens pretty much in a day, July 24th, 1997. Amy leaves in the morning and drives to the Wind River Fitness Center where she teaches the youth class. Amy drops off some items at a recycling center. She has other errands. She connected the electricity and phone services for her new house.
And one way we know this, by the way, is that list she had. And this is like really evocative. And I've read this 1,000 places, and who knows if it's true. All of these items were on her list, and all of the items were crossed off except for the last one, which was go for a run.
Whew, that's chilling. Which, I don't know if you're a list maker, Brett. I am, but it kind of shows how organized she is, right? She is not the type of person who would decide to just go and do something not on her list or to meander off or not do things precisely. In fact, she was listing the mileage by each of the landmarks for her run. I mean, she just seems like a very precise and on top of it kind of person.
I usually make lists after I do things so I can then cross them off. Makes me feel better.
There's a psychological benefit to doing that. So you're just ahead of the game.
Oh, there you go.
So this brings us to around 2:30 when Amy arrived at the gallery to drop off her prints to be matted and framed, and where she talks to her friend, the last person to see her alive. Amy, at this point, is finished with her list, so she's getting ready for her run. She drops by her house, picks up running clothes, and heads to Sinks Canyon, where she'd been running trails lately, and she parks her car at the Burnt Gulch Cutoff.
And so I want you guys to pay really close attention to these next few items, because this timeline is really important for who we think may or may not have been responsible for Amy's disappearance. So Alice has gotten us through, probably we're thinking what, around 3:30 or so. At 2:30 she gets to the gallery, drops off the prints to get matted and framed, goes home, gets her clothes, and heads off to the Burnt Gulch Cutoff.
And Brett, the Burnt Gulch Cutoff is about like a 45-minute drive from her house, right? So that's something to keep in mind as well.
Right, exactly. So you got to think around 3:30 is when she's leaving. So at around 4:30, about an hour later, probably, Steve, her husband, arrives back at their home from his day of rock climbing. Amy's not home. He thinks nothing of it. At 4:43, Steve calls his friend Ed Sherline, who was a philosophy professor at the University of Wyoming, who is also a rock climber. Chats with him for a little while. It's slightly before 5 o'clock. A witness would later claim to have seen a pickup truck similar to Steve's racing down Loop Road with a distraught blonde woman in the passenger seat. And in case we didn't mention it before, in case you're not looking at the photos, Amy was blonde. Another witness will eventually claim to have heard a gunshot around this time near Fry Lake. Well, at 5 o'clock, and this is where you got to start questioning eyewitness statements about time and what they see. At 5 o'clock, Wendy and Jim Gibson pass someone, a runner with blonde hair and fitting Amy's description, running near Fry Lake in the Burnt Gulch area. The runner is moving quickly, which matches Amy's running style. And Wendy and Jim will say that she is hightailing it. And I think some people have mistakenly wondered whether that means she was being chased. But apparently when Amy ran, she ran all out. She was not jogging. That was the way she did it. And Wendy and Jim, they didn't think anything of it. They knew Amy, right? And so they saw this person who they were pretty sure is Amy running really hard at around 5 o'clock. So just to emphasize, because all this becomes important later. So Steve gets home at 4:30. At 4:43, he calls someone. It's slightly before 5. You have one witness who's saying, I saw a pickup truck, looked like Steve's, the blonde woman in it. And another witness at around 5 saying they heard a gunshot. Also at around 5, you have these two individuals, Wendy and Jim Gibson, who pass someone running in the area where Amy was, fitting her description.
A lot happens at 5 o'clock.
Yeah.
In fact, so much happens.
A very important time.
So much that happens that it's not clear that all those things could have happened, right? If there was a gunshot, if there was a car screeching by, and then if Amy was running, it seems like they're mutually exclusive. Like they couldn't have all happened, it seems like.
And if you stretch out the timeline, maybe they could all happen. And this goes back to something we talk about a lot: eyewitness statements and confusion by eyewitnesses. And do eyewitnesses see what they think they see when they think they see it? I mean, timing is such a big deal, right? And that is the thing people mess up all the time. What time is it right now? Wherever you are, wherever you're listening, what time is it? Tell me right now. Without looking at your watch, without looking at a clock, what time is it? You probably don't know. I don't know how close you would get. I mean, I don't know what time it is right now recording this.
When you just asked that, I was like, can I guess? Can I guess? And I could not.
Yeah. I mean, and just think, you see something, you don't even know it's significant, right? Like you see a blue truck, you see a woman, maybe she's distraught, maybe you think, that's weird, right? And then later on, somebody asks you and you think, when was that? Well, we were doing this, and that would have been after we did that thing, and that probably took an hour, and we got there around 4, so 5, right? I mean, that's probably how this time is derived.
Right, absolutely. So at 6:45, a friend stops by to see if Steve wants to join a group for pizza, and Steve asks if Amy is with them. When he's told that Amy's not, he says that he'll wait on her to get home.
And this is, I just want to say one thing about this. These people, Amy and Steve, they'd bought a new house, but right now they lived in these sort of bungalows. I mean, this seems just like an awesome life, but they basically lived in this place where a whole bunch of other young, athletic people were living before they could, get their feet set in Lander. So it's not unusual at all for some friend to wander by and be like, hey, you want to come over and have pizza? Because they're all living together in this one little area.
Brett, you're welcome to come over for pizza anytime.
Oh, thank you. But see, if you live next door, and as I've noted, the house next door is for sale, I could just wander over. And we could have pizza anytime.
That's true. No, I think you're right, though. They are young, and it almost seems like they're so close, like in a college dorm. Their houses are so close together. They all have fun, and they all, are in each other's lives constantly. It seems like a great life.
Their best friends live next door and are actually their landlords, which is kind of interesting. But yeah, it seems like a great life.
Right. And speaking of those friends, at 7 o'clock, the Gibsons drive back by Fry Lake. And this time, although they don't see a runner, they do pass Amy's white Toyota. Wendy looks back and thinks she sees something red and visible in the rear window of Amy's white Toyota.
And this is something that's sort of haunted Wendy ever since, because she really believes that she saw something in that back seat, maybe even Amy. I have no idea what she saw or what she thinks she saw. It doesn't fit with anything we know that Amy would have been there at that time. I would think if she was, we probably would have more evidence than we have now. And I also don't know where the red comes in, because there's no blood in her
And she's
car.
not wearing any red that we know of.
And she's not wearing any red. So I would say this. This is haunted Wendy. She feels like they should have stopped and gone back. In reality, I don't think this had anything to do with Amy.
I agree. I mean, at 7 o'clock, I think, and this is the summertime, it was probably sun setting in the canyons. And if you've ever been in a beautiful national forest, the sunset can be beautiful colors and kind of shining off everything, and it's kind of overpowering. I wonder if the red is just part of the sunset reflecting off the lake or the canyons onto the car window.
That's a really good point. I hadn't thought about that, but that's a fantastic point, because it was the middle of summer, so it would not have been dark by any stretch of the imagination, but the sunset would have begun, and I bet you that's what it was.
Yeah. So, she's thinking back on something that probably was nothing. She never would have thought about it again if Amy had not disappeared. Now, Steve is really beginning to worry. So at 9 o'clock, he calls Amy's parents and asks if they have seen her. They have not. So Steve drives out to one of her training routes, but she's not there either. And he heads towards Sinks Canyon, but halfway there, he decides to turn around and report Amy missing first.
And Sinks Canyon, we've talked about a lot of different places in this little Lander area. Sinks Canyon is the general area of where Amy was. So if he had kept going, he would have found her car.
I understand him, though. At 9, so we just talked about the timeline of the sunset in summer. At 9, especially in the canyon, it starts getting dark pretty quickly, right? As soon as it's dark, it is just pitch black in there. So I can imagine he's like, I could probably cover more ground in the dark if I have help.
Yeah, I think he totally makes the right call at that point. So we're going to go ahead and stop there for today. We've got so much more to talk about in this case. We're going to talk about this more tomorrow, but I hope this has jogged some people's memories. If there's anything you know about this disappearance, if there's anything you can add, if there's anything we've gotten wrong, let us know. prosecutorspod@gmail.com, @prosecutorspod for Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. prosecutorspodcast.com is our website. Reach out to us. Let us know what you think. Let us know if you know anything. Alice, looking forward to getting back together with you tomorrow and finishing up this case.
I can't wait, Brett. It's always the highlight of my night.
Highlight of my night as well. And, who knows? Maybe we can make a difference on this one. But until next time, I'm Brett.
And I'm Alice.
And we are the prosecutors. Can I just say, as an aside, and this is a terrible thing to say, but I'm going to say it anyway because I think it needs to be said. Dave Grohl, I mean, what an amazing musician, right? And he was totally in the shadows of Kurt Cobain when Nirvana was going strong. But man, just think, if Kurt Cobain had not killed himself, we never would have known just what kind of musician Dave Grohl